Mic check 1, 2, 3. Cool. Here we are. Let me check the mic first. Oh, okay, we are live and okay, it isn't buffering. Hello, hello. Cool. Hmm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Cool. Mhm. Posting the link on Twitter. Tweeting the link. The Alchemist. Surprisingly, okay. Surprisingly, the laptop is working fine today. I don't know how. Okay, I have just tweeted the link of this stream on the Twitter. Now let's just wait for some time, and then we shall start the book again. वालेकुम अस्सलाम एनसी डेविड कैसे हो आप ठीक मेरे सारिम सारिम कहीं नजर नहीं आ रहा आजकल आई हैव जस्ट टेक्स्टेड हिम वालेकुम अस्सलाम आइनैन रफीकी सारिम इज नॉट एनीवेयर ऑन एनी सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म कहाँ है वो मैं भी ठीक हूँ अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह वालेकुम अस्सलाम सिनेमैन हाउ आर यू okay we have crossed 11K followers on Twitter today. So it took us around 3 to 4 days to cross that 11K after we completed that 10K mark, and we are about to cross 926 subscribers on YouTube, perhaps. So it won't take us a month. I think perhaps less than a month. In less than a month, we'll be crossing that figure of 1K, inshallah. And then we shall work on the stream hours. We have to at least get to 4,000 stream hours in order to make this channel an official authorized YouTube ticked channel. ठीक है ना? So वालेकुम अस्सलाम सोनी फारूक. So we have just finished 50% of the content of this book, Alchemist, and we shall continue it. वालेकुम अस्सलाम आफ्ताब शेख. कैसे हो आप? And where is Sarim? So I guess we are here and we should continue. I guess we should continue the book because ऑडियंस तो इतनी होती है हमारी. ओके, आई एम स्टार्टिंग क्योंकि फिर टाइम बहुत ज़्यादा लगता है. जितने आ गए हैं उतने काफ़ी है. The boy went back to contemplating the silence of the desert and the sand raised by the animals. Everyone has his or her own way of learning things, he said to himself. His way isn't the same as mine, nor mine as his, but we are both in search of our destinies, and I respect him for that. The caravan began to travel day and night. The hooded Bedouins reappeared more and more frequently, and the camel driver, who had become a good friend of the boy, explained that the war between the tribes had already begun. The caravan would be very lucky to reach the oasis. Animals were exhausted, and the men talked among themselves less and less. The silence was the worst aspect of the night, when the mere groan of a camel, which before had been nothing but the groan of the camel, now frightened everyone, because it might signal a raid. The camel driver, though, seemed not to be very concerned with the threat of the war. I am alive, he said to the boy, as they ate a bunch of dates one night, with no fires and no moon. When I am eating, that's all I think about. If I am on the march, I just concentrate on marching. If I have to fight, it will be just as good a day to die as any other. Because I don't live in either my past or my future. I am interested only in the present. If you concentrate only on the present, you will be a happy man. You will see that there is life in the desert, that there are stars in the heavens, and that tribesmen fight because they are part of the human race. Life will be a party for you, a grand festival, because life is the moment we are living. 2 nights later, as he was getting ready to bed down, the boy looked for the star they followed every night. He thought that the horizon was a bit lower than it had been, because he seemed to see stars on the desert itself. It's the oasis, said the camel driver. Well, why don't we go there right now? The boy asked. Because we have to sleep. The boy awoke as the sun rose. There in front of him, where the small stars had been the night before, was an endless row of date palms stretching across the entire desert. We have done it, said the Englishman, who had also awakened earlier. But the boy was quiet. He was at home with the silence of the desert, and he was content just to look at the trees. He still had a long way to go to reach to the pyramids, and someday this morning would just be a memory. But this was the present moment. The party the camel driver had mentioned, and he wanted to live as he did the lessons of his past and his dreams of the future. Although the vision of the date palms would someday be just a memory, right now it signified shade, water, and refuge from the war. Yesterday the camel's groans signaled danger, and now a row of date palms could herald a miracle. The world speaks many languages, the boy thought. The times rush past, and so do the caravans, thought the alchemist, as he watched the hundreds of people and animals arriving at the oasis. People were shouting at the new arrivals. Dust obscured the desert sun, and the children of the oasis were bursting with excitement at the arrival of the strangers. The alchemist saw the tribal chiefs greet the leader of the caravan and converse with him at length. But none of that mattered to that alchemist. He had already seen many people come and go, and the desert remained as it was. He had seen kings and beggars walking the desert sands. The dunes were changed constantly by the winds. Yet these were the small sands he had known since he was a child. He always enjoyed seeing the happiness that the travelers experienced when, after weeks of yellow sand and blue sky, they first saw the green of the date palms. Maybe God created the desert so that man could appreciate the date trees, he thought. He decided to concentrate on more practical matters. He knew that in the caravan there was a man to whom he was to teach some of his secrets. The omens had told him so. He didn't know the man yet, but his baptized eye would recognize him when he appeared. He hoped that it would be someone as capable as his previous apprentice. I don't know why these things have been transmitted by word of mouth, he thought. It wasn't exactly that they were secrets. God revealed his secrets easily to all his creatures. He had only one explanation for this fact. Things have to be transmitted this way because they were made up from the pure life. And this kind of life cannot be captured in pictures or words because people become fascinated with pictures and words and wind up forgetting the language of the world. The boy couldn't believe what he was seeing. The oasis, rather than being just a well surrounded by a few palm trees, as he had seen once in the geography book, was much larger than many towns back in Spain. There were 300 wells, 50,000 date trees, and innumerable colored trees spread among them. Walaikum assalam, Mudassir. It looks like the 1001 Nights, said the Englishman, impassioned to meet the alchemist. They were surrounded. They were surrounded by children, curious to look at the animals and the people that were arriving. The men of the oasis wanted to know if they had seen any fighting, and the women competed with one another for access to the cloth and precious stones brought by the merchants. The silence of the desert was a distant dream. The travelers in the caravan were talking incessantly, laughing and shouting as if they had emerged from the spiritual world and found themselves once again in the world of people. They were relieved and happy. They had been taking careful precaution in the desert, but the camel driver explained to the boy that oases were always considered to be neutral territories because the majority of the inhabitants were women and children. There were oases throughout the desert, but the tribesmen found in the desert, leaving the oases as places of refuge. With some difficulty, the leader of the caravan brought all his people together and gave them his instructions. The group was to remain silent there at the oasis until the conflict between the tribes was over. Since they were visitors, they would have to share living space with those who lived there and would be given the best accommodations. That was the law of hospitality. Then he asked that everyone, sentinels, hand over their arms to the men appointed by the tribal chieftains. Those are the rules of war, the leader explained. The oasis may not shelter the armies of the troops. To the boy's surprise, the Englishman took a chrome plated revolver out of his bag and gave it to the men who were collecting the arms. Why a revolver? He asked. It helped me to trust in people, the Englishman answered. Meanwhile, the boy thought about his treasure. The closer he got to the realization of his dream, the more difficult things became. It seems as if the old king had called beginner's luck were no longer functioning. In his pursuit of the dream, he was being constantly subjected to the tests of his persistence and courage. So he could not be hasty or nor impatient. If he pushed forward impulsively, he would fail to see the signs and omens left by God along his path. God placed them along my path. He had surprised himself with the thought until he had considered the omens to be the best things of this world, like eating or sleeping, or like seeking love or finding a job. He had never thought of them in terms of a language used by God. It indicated what he should do. Don't be impatient, he repeated to himself. It's like the camel driver said, eat when it's time to eat, and move along when it's time to move along. The first day, everyone slept from exhaustion, including the Englishman. The boy was assigned to a place far from his friend, in a tent with five other young men of about his age. They were the people of the desert and clamored to hear the stories about the great steeds. The boy told them about his life as a shepherd and was about to tell them the experiences of his at the crystal shore when the Englishman came into the tent. I have been looking for you all morning, he said, as he led the boy outside. I need you to help me find out where the alchemist lives. Firstly, they tried to find him on their own. An alchemist would probably live in a manner that was different from that of the rest of the world, and rest of the people at the oasis, and it was likely that in his tent an oven was continuously burning. They searched everywhere and found that the oasis was much larger than they could have imagined. There were hundreds of tents. We have wasted almost the entire day, said the Englishman, sitting down with the boy near one of the wells. Maybe we would better ask someone, the boy suggested. The Englishman didn't want to tell others about his reasons for being at the oasis and couldn't make up his mind, but finally he agreed that the boy, who spoke better Arabic than he, should do so. The boy approached a woman who had come to the well to fill a goat skin with water. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm trying to find out where the alchemist lives here at the oasis. The woman said she had never heard of such a person and hurried away. But before she fled, she advised the boy that he had better not to try to converse with men who were dressed in black because they were married women. He should respect tradition. The Englishman was disappointed. It seemed he had made the long journey for nothing. The boy was also saddened. His friend was in pursuit of his destiny, and when someone was in such pursuit, the entire universe made an effort to help him succeed. That's what the old king had said. He couldn't have been wrong. I had never had heard of alchemists before, the boy said. Maybe no one here has either. The Englishman's eyes lit up. That's it. Maybe no one here knows what an alchemist is. Find out who it is who cures the people's illness. Several women dressed in black came to the well for water, but the boy would speak to none of them, despite Englishmen's insistence. Then a man approached. Do you know someone here who cures people's illness? The boy asked. Allah cures our illness, said the man, clearly frightened of the strangers. You are looking for witch doctors. WITCH. He spoke some verses from the Quran and moved on. Another man appeared. He was older and was carrying a small bucket. The boy repeated his question. Why do you want to find that sort of person? The Arab asked. Because my friend here has traveled for many months in order to meet him, the boy said. If such a man is here at the oasis, he must be the very powerful one, said the old man, after thinking for a few moments. Not even the tribal chieftains are able to see him when they want to, only when he consents. Wait for the end of the war, then leave with the caravan. Don't try to enter into the life of the oasis, he said and walked away. But the Englishman was exultant. They were on the right track. Finally, a young woman approached who was not dressed in black. She had a vessel on her shoulder and her head was covered by a veil, but her face was uncovered. The boy approached her to ask about the alchemist. At that moment, it seemed to him that time stood still, and the soul of the world surged within him. When he looked into her dark eyes and saw that her lips were poised between a laugh and silence, he learned the most important part of the language that all the world spoke, the language that everyone on earth was capable of understanding in their heart. It was love. Something older than humanity, more ancient than desert, something that exerted the same force whenever two pairs of eyes meet or met, as had theirs here at the well. She smiled, and that was certainly an omen. The omen he had been awaiting without even knowing he was, for all his life, the omen he had sought to find with his sheep and in his books, in the crystals and in the silence of the desert. It was the pure language of the world, it required no explanation, just as the universe needs none as it travels through the endless time. What the boy felt at that moment was that he was in the presence of the only woman in his life, and that, with no need for words, she recognized the same thing. He was more certain of it than of anything in the world. He had been told by his parents and grandparents that he must fall in love and really know a person before becoming committed. But maybe people who felt that way had never learned the universal language. Because when you know that language, it's easy to understand that someone in the world awaits you, whether it's in the middle of the desert or in some great city. And when two such people encounter each other and their eyes meet, the past and the future become unimportant. There's only one that there's only that moment and the incredible certainty that everything under the sun has been written by one hand only. It's the hand that evokes love, and creates a twin soul for every person in the world. Without such love, one's dreams would have no meaning. Maktub, thought the boy. The Englishman shook the boy. Come on, ask her. The boy stepped closer to the girl, and when she smiled, he did the same. What's your name? He asked. Fatima, the girl said, averting her eyes. That's what some women in the country are called. It's the name of the prophet's daughter, Fatima said. The invaders carried the name everywhere. The beautiful girl spoke of the invaders with pride. The Englishman prodded him, and the boy asked her about the man who cured people's illness. That's the man who knows all the secrets of the world, she said. He communicates with the genies of the desert. The genies were the spirits of good and evil. And the girl pointed out to the south, indicating that it was there that the strange man lived. Then she filled her vessel with water and left. The Englishman vanished too, gone to find the alchemist, and the boy sat there by the wall for a long time, remembering that one day in Tarifa the lavender had brought to him the perfume of that woman, and realizing that he had loved her before he even knew she existed. He knew that his love for her would enable him to discover every treasure in the world. The next day, the boy returned to the well, hoping to see the girl. To his surprise, the Englishman was there, looking out at the desert. I waited all afternoon and evening, he said. He appeared with the first stars of evening. I told him what I was seeking, and he asked me if I had ever transformed lead into gold. I told him that was what I had come to learn. He told I should try to do so. That's all he said. Go and try. The boy didn't say anything. The poor Englishman had travelled all this way, only to be told that he should repeat what he had already done so many times. So, then try, he said to the Englishman. That's what I am doing. That's what I am going to do. I am going to start now. As the Englishman left, Fatima arrived and filled her vessel with water. I came to tell you just one thing, the boy said. I want to I want you to be my wife. I love you. The girl dropped the container and the water spilled. I am going to wait here for you every day. I have crossed the desert in search of a treasure that is somewhere near the pyramids. And for me, the war seemed a curse. But now it's a blessing because it brought me to you. The war is going to end someday, the girl said. The boy looked around him at the date palms. He reminded himself that he had been a shepherd and that he could be a shepherd again. Fatima was more important than his treasure. The tribesmen are always in search of a treasure, the girl said, as if she had guessed what he was thinking. And the women of the desert are proud of their tribesmen. She refilled her vessel and left. The boy went to the well every day to meet Fatima. He told her about his life as a shepherd, about the king, and about the crystal shop. They became friends, and except for 15 minutes he spent with her, each day seemed that it would never pass. When he had been at the oasis for almost a month, the leader of the caravan called a meeting of all people traveling with him. We don't know when the war will end, so we can't continue our journey, he said. The battles may last for a long time, perhaps even years. There are powerful forces on both sides, and the war is important to both armies. It's not a battle of good against evil, it's a war between forces that are fighting for the balance of power. And when that type of battle begins, it lasts longer than others because Allah is on both sides. The people went back to where they were living, and the boy went to meet with Fatima that afternoon. He told her about the morning's meet, the day after we met. Fatima said, "You told me about that. You loved me. Then you taught me something of the universal language and the soul of the world. Because of that, I have become a part of you." The boy listened to the sound of a voice and thought it to be more beautiful than the sound of the wind in the date palms. "I have been waiting for you here at this oasis for a long time. I have forgotten about my past, about my traditions, and the way in which men of the desert expect women to behave. Ever since I was a child, I have dreamed that the desert would bring me a wonderful present. Now my present has arrived, and it's you." The boy wanted to take her hand, but Fatima's hands held to the handles of a jug. "You have told me about your dreams, about the old king and your treasure, and you have told me about omens. So now I fear nothing, because it was those omens that brought you to me, and I am a part of your dream and a part of your destiny, as you call it. That's why I want you to continue towards your goal. If you have to wait until the war is over, then wait. But if you have to go before then, go on in pursuit of your dream. The dunes are changed by the wind, but the deserts never change. That's the way it will be with our love for each other. Maktub, she said. If I am really a part of your dream, you will come back one day. The boy was sad as he left her that day. He thought of all the married shepherds he had known. They had a difficult time convincing their wives that they had to go off in the distant fields. Love required them to stay with the people they loved. He told Fatima that at their next meeting, "The desert takes our men from us, and they don't always return," she said. "We know that, and we are used to it. Those who don't return become a part of the clouds, a part of the animals that hide in the ravines, and of the water that comes from the earth. They become a part of everything. They become the soul of the world. Some do come back, and then the other women are happy because they believe that their men may one day return as well. I used to look at those women and envy them their happiness. Now I too will be one of the women who will be. I am a desert woman and I'm proud of that. I want my husband to wander as free as the wind that shapes the dunes. And if I have to, I will accept the fact that he has become a part of the clouds and the animals and the water of the desert. The boy went look the boy went to look for the Englishman. He wanted to tell him about Fatima. He was surprised when he saw that the Englishman had built himself a furnace outside his tent. It was a strange furnace, fueled by firewood with a transparent flask heating on top. As the Englishman stared out at the desert, his eyes seemed brighter than they had when he was reading his books. "This is the first phase of the job," he said. "I have to separate out the sulfur. To do that successfully, I must have no fear of failure. It was my fear of failure that first kept me from attempting the masterwork. Now I am beginning what I could have started 10 years ago. But I am happy at least that I didn't wait 20 years." He continued to feed the fire, and the boy stayed on until the desert turned pink in the setting sun. He felt the urge to go out in the desert to see if its silence held the answers to his questions. He wandered for a while, keeping the date palms of the oasis within the sight. He listened to the winds and felt stones beneath his feet. Here and there he found a shell and realized that the desert in remote times had been a sea. He sat on a stone and allowed himself to become hypnotized by the horizon. He tried to deal with the concept of love as distinct from possessions and couldn't separate them. But Fatima was a woman of the desert, and if anything could help him to understand, it was the desert. And he sat there thinking. He sensed movement above him. Looking up, he saw a pair of hawks flying high in the sky. He watched the hawks as they drifted on the wind. Although their flight appeared to have no pattern, it made a certain kind of sense to the boy. It was just that he couldn't grasp what it meant. He followed the movements of the birds, trying to read something into it. Maybe that these desert birds could explain to him the meaning of love without ownership. He felt sleepy. In his heart, he wanted to remain awake, but he also wanted to sleep. "I am learning the language of the world, and everything in the world in the beginning to make sense to me, even the flight of the hawks," he said to himself. And in that mood, he was grateful to be in love. When you are in love, things make even more sense, he thought. Suddenly, one of the hawks made a flashing dive through the sky, attacking the other. As it did so, a sudden fleeting image came to the boy: an army with its sword at the ready, riding into the oasis. The vision vanished immediately, but it had shaken him. He had heard people speak of mirages and had already seen some himself. They were desires that, because of their intensity, materialized over the sand of the desert. But he could certainly didn't desire. But he certainly didn't desire that an army invade the oasis. He wanted to forget about the vision and return to his meditation. He tried again to concentrate on the pink shades of the desert and its stones. But there was something there in the heart that wouldn't allow him to do so. "Always heed the omens," the old king said. The boy recalled what he had seen in the vision and sensed that it was actually going to occur. He rose and made his way back towards the palm trees. Once again, he perceived the many languages in the things about him. This time, the desert was safe, and it was the oasis that had become dangerous. The camel driver was seated at the base of the palm tree, observing the sunset. He saw the boy appear from the other side of the dunes. "An army is coming," the boy said. "I had a vision." "The desert fills men's hearts with visions," the camel driver answered. But the boy told him about the hawks, that he had been watching their flight and had suddenly felt himself to have plunged to the soul of the world. The camel driver understood what the boy was saying. He knew that any given thing on the face of the earth could reveal the history of all things. One could open a book to any page, or look at the person's hand. One could turn a card, or watch the flight of the birds. Whatever the thing observed, one could find a connection with his experience of the moment. Actually, it wasn't that those things in themselves revealed anything at all. It was just the people looking at what was occurring around them could find a means of penetration to the soul of the world. The desert was full of men who earned their living based on the ease of which they could penetrate to the soul of the world. They were known as seers, and they were held in fear by women and the elderly. Tribesmen were also wary of consulting them because it would be impossible to be effective in battle if one knew that he was fated to die. The tribesmen preferred the taste of battle and the thrill of not knowing what the outcome would be. The future was already written by Allah, and what He had written was always good for the men. So the tribesmen lived only for the present because the present was full of surprises, and they had to be aware of many things. What was the enemy's sword? Where was his horse? What kind of blow should one deliver next in order to remain alive? The camel driver was not a fighter, and he had consulted his seers. Many of them had been right about what they said, while some had been wrong. Then one day, the oldest seer he had ever sought of, and one of the most to be feared, had asked why the camel driver was so interested in the future. Well, so I can do things, had responded. And so I can change those things that I don't want to happen. But then they wouldn't be part of the future. The seer had said, well, maybe I just want to know the future so I can prepare myself for what's coming. If good things are coming, they will be a pleasant surprise, said the seer. If bad things are, you know in advance, you will suffer greatly because they even occur. I want to know about the future because I am a man, the camel driver had said to the seer. And the man always live their lives based on the future. The seer was a specialist in the casting of twigs. He threw them on the ground and made interpretations based on how they fell. That day he didn't make a cast. He wrapped the twigs in a piece of cloth and put them back in his bay. I make my living forecasting the future of the people, he said. I know the science of twigs, and I know how to use them to penetrate to the place where all is written. There I can read the past, discover what has already been forgotten, and understand the omens that are here in the present. When people consult me, it's not that I am reading the future. I am guessing at the future. The future belongs to God, and it's only He who reveals it under extraordinary circumstances. How do I guess at the future? Based on the omens of the present. The secret is here in the present. If you pay attention to the present, you can improve upon it. And if you improve on the present, what comes later will also be better. Forget about the future and live each day according to the teachings, confident that God loves His children each day, and itself brings with it an eternity. The camel driver had asked what about the circumstances under which the God would allow him to see the future. Only when He Himself reveals it. And God only really reveals the future. When He does so, it is for only one reason. It's a future that was written so as to be altered. God had shown the boy a part of the future. The camel driver thought. Why was it that he wanted the boy to serve as his instrument? Go and speak to the tribal chieftains, said the camel driver. Tell them about the armies that are approaching. They will laugh at me. They are the men of the desert, and the men of the desert are used to dealing with omens. Well, then, they probably already know. They are not concerned with that right now. They believe that if they have to know about something Allah wants them to know, someone will tell them about it. It has happened many a times before. But this time, the person is you. The boy thought of Fatima, and he decided he would go to see chiefs of the tribes. The boy approached the god at the front of the huge wild tent at the center of the oasis. I want to see the chieftains. I have brought omens from the desert. Without responding, the god entered the tent where he remained for some time. When he emerged, it was with a young Arab, dressed in white and gold. The boy told the younger man what he had seen, and the man asked him to wait there. He disappeared into the tent. Night fell, and an assortment of fighting men and merchants entered and exited the tents. One by one, the campfires were extinguished, and the oasis fell as quiet as the desert. Only the lights in the great tent remained. During all this time, the boy thought about Fatima, and he was still unable to understand his last conversation with her. Finally, after hours of waiting, the god bade the boy enter. The boy was astonished by what he saw inside. Never could he have imagined that there in the middle of the desert there existed a tent like this one. The ground was covered with most beautiful carpets he had ever walked upon, and from the top of the structure huge lamps of hand wrought gold, each with a lighted candle. The tribal chieftains were seated at the back of the tent in the semicircle, resting upon the richly embroidered silk cushions. Servants came and went with silver trays laden with spices and teas. Other servants maintained the fires in the hookahs. The atmosphere was suffused with a sweet scent of smoke. There were 8 chieftains, but the boy could see immediately which of them was the most important. An Arab dressed in white and gold, seated at the center of the semicircle. At his side was the young Arab boy who had already spoken with him earlier. "Who is the stranger who speaks of omens?" asked one of the chieftains, eyeing the boy. "It is I," the boy answered, and he told what he had seen. "Why would the desert reveal such a thing to a stranger when it knows that he have been here for generations?" said another of the chieftains. "Because my eyes are not yet accustomed to the desert," the boy said. "I can see things that eyes habituated to the desert might not see. And also because I know about the soul of the world," he thought to himself. "The oasis is neutral ground. No one attacks an oasis," said a third chieftain. "I can only tell you what I saw. If you don't want to believe me, you don't have to do anything about it." The men fell into an animated discussion. They spoke in an Arabic dialect that the boy didn't understand. But when he made to leave, the god told him to stay. The boy became fearful. The omens told him that something was wrong. He regretted having spoken to the camel driver about what he had seen in the desert. Suddenly, the elder at the center smiled, almost imperceptibly, and the boy felt better. The man had participated in the discussions and, in fact, hadn't said a word up to that point. But the boy was already used to the language of the world and he could feel the vibrations of peace throughout the tent. Now his intuition was that he had been right in coming. The discussion ended. The chieftains were silent for a few moments as they listened to what the old man was saying. Then he turned to the boy, this time with his expression was cold and distant. 2,000 years ago, in a distant land, a man who believed in dreams was thrown in a dungeon and then sold as a slave, the old man said. Now, in the dialect the boy understood, our merchants bought that man and brought him to Egypt. All of us know that whoever believes in dreams also knows how to interpret them. The elder continued, when the Pharaoh dreamed of cows that were thin and cows that were fat, this man, I am speaking of, rescued Egypt from famine. His name was Joseph. He too was a stranger in a strange land like you, and he was probably about your age. He paused, and his eyes were still unfriendly. We always observe the tradition. The tradition saved Egypt from the famine in those days and made the Egyptians the wealthiest of people. The tradition teaches men how to cross the desert and how their children should marry. The tradition says that an oasis is neutral territory because both sides have oases and so both are vulnerable. No one said a word as the old man continued. But the tradition also says that we should believe the message of the desert. Everything we know was taught to us by the desert. The old man gave a signal and everyone stood up. The meeting was over. The hookahs were extinct. The guards stood at attention. The boy made ready to leave, but the old man spoke again. Tomorrow we are going to break the agreement that says that no one at the oasis may carry arms. Throughout the entire day, we will be on the lookout for our enemies. When the sun sets, the men will once again surrender their arms to me. For every 10 dead men among our enemies, you will receive a gold piece. But arms cannot be drawn unless they also go into battle. Arms are as capricious as the desert, and if they are not used, the next time they might not function. If at least one of them hadn't been used by the end of the day tomorrow, one will be used on you. When the boy left the tent, the oasis was illuminated by only by the light of the full moon. He was 20 minutes from his tent and began to make his way there. He was alarmed by what had happened. He had succeeded in reaching through the to the soul of the world, and now the prize for having done so might be his life. It was the frightening bet, but he had been making risky bets ever since the day he had sold his sheep to pursue his destiny. And as the camel driver had said, to die tomorrow was no worse than dying on other day. Every day was there to be lived. Every day was there to be lived or to mark one's departure from this world. Everything depended on one word, maktub. Walking along in the silence, he had no regrets. If he died tomorrow, it would be because God was not willing to change the future. He would at least have died after having crossed the street, after having worked in the crystal shop, and after having known the silence of the desert and Fatima's eyes. He had lived every one of his days intensely since he had left his home so long ago. If he died tomorrow, he would already have seen more than other shepherds, and he was proud of that. Suddenly, he heard a thundering sound, and he was thrown to the ground by a wind such as he had never known. The area was swirling in dust, so intense that it hid the moon from the view. Before him was an enormous white horse, rearing over him with a frightening scream. When the blinding dust had settled a bit, the boy trembled at what he saw. Astride the animal was a horseman dressed completely in black, with the falcon perched on his left shoulder. He wore a turban, and his entire face, except his eyes, was covered with black kerchief. He appeared to be a messenger from the desert, but his presence was much more powerful than one of a messenger. The strange horseman drew an enormous curved sword from a scabbard mounted on his saddle. The steel of its blade glittered in the light of the moon. Who dares to read the meaning of the flight of the hawks? He demanded, so loudly that his words seemed to echo through the 50,000 palm trees of Al Fayoum. It is I who dare to do so, said the boy. He was reminded of the image of Santiago Matamoros, mounted on his white horse, with the infidels beneath his hose. This man looked exactly the same, except that now the roles were reversed. It is I who dare to do so, he repeated, and he lowered his head to receive a blow from the sword. Many lives will be saved because I was able to see through to the soul of the world. The sword didn't fall. Instead, the stranger lowered it slowly until the point touched the boy's forehead. It drew a droplet of blood. The horseman was completely immobile, as was the boy. It didn't even occur to the boy to flee. In his heart, he felt a strange sense of joy. He was about to die in pursuit of his destiny and for Fatima. The omens had been true, after all. Here he was, face to face with his enemy. But there was no need to be concerned about dying. The soul of the world awaited him, and he would soon to be a part of it. And tomorrow his enemy would also be a part of the soul. Stranger continued to hold sword at the boy's forehead. Why did you read the flight of the birds? I read only what the birds wanted to tell me. They wanted to save the oasis. Tomorrow all of you will die because there are more men at the oasis than you have. The sword remained where it was. Who are you to change what Allah has willed? Allah created the armies and He also created the hawks. Allah taught me the language of the birds. Everything has been written by the same hand, the boy said, remembering the camel driver's words. The stranger withdrew the sword from the boy's forehead, and the boy felt immensely relieved, but he still couldn't flee. Be careful with your prognostications, said the stranger. When something is written, there is no way to change it. All I saw was an army, said the boy. I didn't see the outcome of the battle. The stranger seemed satisfied with the answer, but he kept the sword at his hand. What is a stranger doing in the strange land? I am following a destiny. It's not something you would understand. The stranger placed his sword in his scabbard, and the boy relaxed. I had to test your courage, the stranger said. Courage is the quality most essential to understanding the language of the world. The boy was surprised. The stranger was speaking of things that very few people know about. You must not let up, even after having come so far, he continued. You must love the desert, but never trust it completely, because the desert tests all men. It challenges every step and kills those who become distracted. What he said reminded the boy of the old king. If the warriors come near, and your head is still on your shoulders at sunset, come and find me, said the stranger. The same hand that had brandished the sword now held a whip. The horse reared again, raising a cloud of dust. Where do you live? Shouted the boy, as the horseman rode away. The hand with the whip pointed to the south. The boy had met the alchemist. Next morning, there were 2,000 armed men scattered throughout the palm trees at Al Fayoum. Before the sun had reached at its highest point, 500 tribesmen appeared on the horizon. The mountain troops entered the oasis from the north. It appeared to be a peaceful expedition, but they all carried arms hidden in their robes. When they when they reached the white tent at the center of the Al Fayoum, they withdrew their scimitars and rifles, and they attacked an empty tent. The men of the oasis surrounded the horsemen from the desert, and within the half an hour, all but one of the intruders were dead. The children had been kept at the other side of the grove of the palm trees and saw nothing of what had happened. The women had remained in their tents, praying for the safekeeping of their husbands, and saw nothing of the battle either. Were it not for the bodies there on the ground, it would have appeared to be a normal day at the end of the oasis. The only tribesman spared was the commander of the battalion. That afternoon he was brought before the tribal chieftains, who asked him why he had violated the tradition. The commander said that his men had been starving and thirsty, exhausted from many battles, and he had decided to take the oasis so as to be able to return to war. The tribal chieftain said that he felt sorry for the tribesmen, but that the tradition was sacred. He condemned the commander to death without honor. Rather than being killed by a blade or blood, he was hanged from the date, dead palm tree, where his body twisted in the desert wind. Tribal chieftain called for the boy and presented him with 50 pieces of gold. He repeated his story about Yusuf of Egypt and asked the boy to become the counselor of the oasis. When the sun had set and the first stars made their appearance, the boy started to walk to the south. He eventually sighted a single tent, and a group of Arabs passing by told the boy that it was the place inhabited by genies. But the boy sat down and awaited. Not until the moon was high did the alchemist rode into view. He carried two dead hawks over his shoulder. I am here, the boy said. You shouldn't be here, the alchemist answered. Or is it your destiny that brings you here? With the wars between the tribes, it's impossible to cross the desert. So I have come here. The alchemist dismounted from his horse and signaled that the boy should enter the tent with him. It was a tent like many at the oasis. The boy looked around for the ovens and the other apparatus used in alchemy, but saw none. There were only some books in a pile, a small cooking stove, and the carpets covered with mysterious designs. Sit down, we will have something to drink and eat these hawks, said the alchemist. The boy suspected that they were the same hawks he had seen on the day before, but he had said nothing. The alchemist lighted the fire, and soon a delicious aroma filled in the tent. It was better than the scent of the hookahs. Why did you want to see me? The boy asked. Because of the omens, the alchemist answered. The wind told me you would be coming and that you would need help. It's not I, the wind spoke about. It's the other foreigner, the Englishman. He's the one that's been looking for you. He has other things to do first, but he's on the right track. He has begun to try to understand the desert. And what about me? When a person really desires something, all the universe conspires to help that person to realize his dream, said the alchemist. Echoing the words of the old king, the boy understood. Another person was there to help him towards his destiny. So you are going to instruct me? No, you already know all you need to know. I am only going to point you in the direction of your treasure. But there's a tribal war, the boy reiterated. I know what's happening in the desert. I have already found my treasure. I have a camel. I have my money from the crystal shop. And I have 50 gold pieces. In my country, I would be a rich man. But none of that is from the pyramids, said the alchemist. I also have Fatima. She is a treasure greater than anything else I have won. She wasn't found at the pyramids either. They ate in silence. The alchemist opened a bottle and poured a red liquid into the boy's cup. It was the most delicious wine he had ever tasted. Isn't wine prohibited here? The boy asked. It's not what enters men's mouths that's evil, said the alchemist. It's what comes out of their mouths that is. The alchemist was a bit daunting, but as the boy drank the wine, he relaxed. After they finished eating, they sat outside the tent under a moon so brilliant that it made the stars pale. Drink and enjoy yourself, said the alchemist, noticing that the boy was feeling happier. Rest well tonight as if you were a warrior preparing for combat. Remember that wherever your heart is, there you will find your treasure. You have got to find the treasure so that everything you have learned along the way can make sense. Tomorrow, sell your camel and buy a horse. Camels are treacherous. They walk thousands of paces and never seem to tire. They suddenly, then suddenly, they kneel and die. But horses tire bit by bit. You always know how much you can ask of them. And when it's that they are about to die, the following night, the boy appeared at the alchemist's tent with a horse. The alchemist was ready, and he mounted his own steed and placed the falcon on his left shoulder. He said to the boy, show me where there is life out in the desert. Only those who can see such signs of life are able to find the treasure. They began to ride out over the sands, with the moon lighting their way. I don't know if I'll be able to find life in the desert, the boy thought. I don't know the desert that well yet. He wanted to say to the alchemist, but he was afraid of the men. He had seen in the hawks where boy had seen the hawks in the sky, but now there was only silence and the winds. I don't know how to find life in the deserts, the boy said. I know that there is life here, but I don't know where to look. Life attracts life, the alchemist answered. And then the boy understood that he loosened the reins on his horse, who galloped forward over the rocks and sand. The alchemist followed as the boy's horse ran for almost half an hour. They could no longer see the date palms of the oasis, only the gigantic moon above them, and its silver reflections from the stones of the desert. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the boy's horse began to slow. There's life here, the boy said to the alchemist. I don't know the language of the desert, but my horse knows the language of the desert. They dismounted, and the alchemist said nothing. Advancing slowly, they searched among the stones. The alchemist stopped abruptly and bent to the ground. There was a hole there among the stones. The alchemist put his hand into the hole and his entire arm up to his shoulder. Something was moving there. The alchemist's eyes, the boy could see only his eyes squinted with his effort. His arm seemed to be battling with whatever was in the hole. Then, with a motion he startled the boy, he withdrew his arm and leaped to his feet. In his hand, he grasped a snake by the tail. The boy leapt as well, but away from the alchemist. The snake fought frantically, making hissing sounds that shattered the silence of the desert. It was a cobra, whose venom could kill a person in minutes. Watch out for his venom, the boy said. But even though the alchemist had put his hand in the hole, he surely already been bitten. His expression was the snakes of the deserts. The boy watched as his companion went to his horse and withdrew a smiter. With his blade, he drew the circle in the sand and then he placed the snake within it. The serpent relaxed immediately. Not to worry, said the alchemist. He won't leave the circle. You found life in the desert, the omen that I needed. Why was that so important? Because the pyramids are surrounded by the deserts. The boy didn't want to talk about the pyramid. His heart was heavy and he had been melancholy since the previous night. To continue his search for the treasure meant that he had to abandon Fatima. I am going to guide you across the desert, the alchemist said. I want to stay at the oasis, the boy answered. I have found Fatima, and as far as I am concerned, she is worth more than a treasure. Fatima is a woman of desert, said the alchemist. She knows that men have to go away in order to return, and she already has a treasure. It's you. Now she expects that you will find what it is you are looking for. Well, what if I decided to stay? Let me tell you about what will happen. You will be counselor of the oasis. You will have enough gold to buy many sheep and camels. You will marry Fatima. You will be both happy for a year. You will learn to love the desert and you will get to know every one of the 50,000 palms. You will watch them as they grow old, demonstrating how the world is always changing. And you will get better and better at understanding omens because the desert is the best teacher there is. Sometime during the second year, you will remember about the treasure. The omens will begin insistently to speak of it, and you will try to ignore them. You will use your knowledge for the welfare of the oasis and its inhabitants. The tribal chieftains will appreciate what you do, and your camels, will bring you wealth and power. During the third year, the omens will continue to speak of your treasure and your destiny. You will walk around night after night at the oasis, and Fatima will be unhappy because she will feel it was she who interrupted your quest. But you will love her, and she will return your love. You will remember that she never asked you to stay, because a woman of the desert knows that she must await her man. So you won't blame her. but many times you will walk the sands of the desert, thinking that maybe you could have left it, that you could have trusted more in your love for Fatima, because what kept you at the oasis was your own fear that you might never come back. At that point, the omens will tell you that your treasure is buried forever. Then, sometime during the fourth year, the omens will abandon you because you have stopped listening to them. The tribal chieftains will see that and you will be dismissed from your position as counselor. But by that, then you will be a rich merchant with many camels and a great deal of merchandise. You will spend the rest of your days knowing that you didn't pursue your destiny and that now it's too late. You must understand that love never keeps a man from pursuing his destiny. If he abandons that pursuit, it's because it wasn't true love, the love that speaks the language of the world. Alchemist erased the circle in the sand and the snake slithered away the rocks. The boy remembered the crystal merchant who had always wanted to go to Mecca and the Englishman in search of the alchemist. He thought of the woman who had trusted in the desert, and he looked out over the desert that had brought him to the woman he loved. They mounted their horses, and this time it was the boy who followed the alchemist back to the oasis. The wind brought the sound of the oasis to them, and the boy tried to hear Fatima's voice. But that night, as he had watched the cobra within the circle, the strange horseman with the falcon on his shoulder had spoken of love and the treasure, of the woman of the desert and of his destiny. I am going with you, the boy said, and he immediately felt peace in his heart. We will leave tomorrow before the sunrise, was the alchemist's only response. The boy spent a sleepless night. 2 hours before dawn, he awoke one of the boys who slept in the tent and asked him to show where Fatima lived. They went to her tent, and the boy gave his friend enough gold to buy a sheep. Then he asked his friend to go into the tent where Fatima was sleeping and to awaken her and tell her that he was waiting outside. The young Arab did as he was asked and was given enough gold to buy yet another sheep. Now leave us alone, said the boy and the young Arab to the younger. The Arab returned to his tent to sleep, proud to have helped the counselor of the oasis and happy at having enough money to buy himself some sheep. Fatima appeared at the entrance of the tent. The two walked out among palms. The boy knew that it was a violation of the tradition, but that didn't matter to him now. I am going away, he said, and I want you to know that I am coming back. I love you because. Don't say anything, Fatima interrupted. One is loud because one is loud. No reason is needed for loving. But the boy continued, I had a dream and I met with the king. I sold the crystal and across the desert. And now, because the tribes declared the war, I went to the well seeking the alchemist. So I love you because the entire universe conspired to help me to find you. The two embraced, and it was the first time either had touched the other. I'll be back, the boy said. Before this, I have always looked to the desert with longing, said Fatima. Now it will be with hope. My father went away one day, but he returned to my mother, and he always come back. They said nothing else. They walked a bit farther among the palms, and then the boy left her at the entrance to her tent. I will return just as your father came back to your mother, he said. He saw that Fatima's eyes were filled with tears. You're crying. I am a woman of desert, she said, averting her face. But above all, I am a woman. Fatima went back to her tent, and when daylight came, she went out to the chores she had done for years. But everything had changed. The boy was no longer at the oasis, and the oasis would never again have the same meaning it had only yesterday. It would no longer be a place with 50,000 palm trees and 300 bells where the pilgrims arrived, relieved at the end of their long journeys. From that day on, the oasis would be an empty place for her. From that day on, it was the desert that would be more important. She would look to it every day and would try to guess which star the boy was following in search of his treasure. She would have to send her kisses on the wind, hoping that the wind would touch the boy's face and would tell him that she was alive, that she was waiting for him. A woman awaiting a courageous man in search of his treasure. From that day on, a desert would represent only one thing to her: the hope for his return. Don't think about what you have left behind, the alchemist said to the boy as they began to ride across the sands of the desert. Everything is written in the soul of the world, and there it will stay forever. Men dream about coming home, then about leaving. Silence. If what one finds is made of pure matter, it will never spoil, and one can always come back. If what you had found was only a moment of light, like the explosion of a star, you would find nothing on your return. The man was speaking the language of alchemy. The boy knew that he was referring to Fatima. It was difficult not to think about what he had left behind. The desert, with its endless monotony, put him to dreaming. The boy could still see the palm trees, the wells, and the face of the woman he loved. He could see the Englishman at his experiments, the camel driver who was a teacher without realizing it. Maybe the alchemist has never been in love, the boy thought. The alchemist rode in front with the falcon on his shoulder. The bird knew the language of the desert well, and whenever they stopped, he flew off in search of game. On the first day, he returned with a rabbit. On the second day, with two birds. At night, they spread their sleeping gear and kept their fires hidden. Okay, we have finished 75% of this book. I think that's it for today. It's already too late, 11:43. Glad आज पांच बंदे यहाँ पे ठहरे. So we are almost at the end of this Alchemist. I think कल खत्म हो जाएगी easily. So मैं रुक गया, मैं और भी पढ़ सकता था, then कल मज़ा नहीं आता. अभी जितना हमने पढ़ा, अब कल और भी क्यूरियस हो जाएंगे इसको लेके कि आगे क्या होता है, तो that's why I stopped. हाँ, मुबारक की बात है, कल खत्म होने जा रहा है ये. ओके, नाइस. चलिए, क्या ही कर सकते हैं. My laptop is running out of battery, so let me plug in the charger first. तो कैसा लगा आपको एल्केमिस्ट सो फार, ये सफर इस लड़के का? Now that finally he has met the alchemist and the love of his life. सो गए हो क्या? मैं बात तो पे साइड नहीं नंदराज. हेलो गाइस, हेलो गाइस. ऑफ सब सो गए क्या? ऑफ ऑफ सो गए. सो चलिए ठीक है, अभी 25% कर लेते हैं हम. अच्छा नहीं तो, अच्छा नहीं जिंदा है. मुझे लगा सब सो गए. आई थॉट सो. चले कोई नहीं. سو آئی تھنک روم ہی پڑھ لیں، اس کے بعد نکلتے ہیں یہاں سے. واٹ ڈو یو سے گائز؟ یا کچھ اور بتا دیجیے جلدی جلدی. زی بھی ابھی یہی پہ ہے. بڑی اچھی بات ہے. پتا نہیں کیسے آج یہ یہاں پہ، ادروائز یہ تو اس ٹائم گھوڑے بیچ کر سو رہی ہوتی ہیں. ہوں، ویسا ہی لگ رہا ہے. سو چلیے تھوڑا سا میں کچھ پڑھ لیتا ہوں جان صاحب کا، تو پھر اینڈ کر لیتے ہیں. جان صاحب کا ہی ڈھونڈ رہا ہوں میں، کیا پڑھے ان کا. فرماتے ہیں کہ سب چلے گئے کیا؟ چلے میں پڑھتا ہوں کہ کس سے اظہار مدعا کیجیے، کس سے اظہار مدعا کیجیے، آپ ملتے نہیں ہیں کیا کیجیے. کس سے اظہار مدعا کیجیے، آپ ملتے نہیں ہیں کیا کیجیے. ہو نہ پایا یہ فیصلہ اب تک، ہو نہ پایا یہ فیصلہ اب تک، آپ کیجیے تو کیا کیا کیجیے. آپ تھے جس کے چار اگر وہ جواں، سخت بیمار ہے دعا کیجیے. ایک ہی فن تو ہم نے سیکھا ہے، ایک ہی فن تو ہم نے سیکھا ہے، جس سے ملیے اسے خفا کیجیے. ہے تقاضا میری طبیعت کا، ہر کسی کو چراغ پا کیجیے. آج ہم کیا گلہ کریں اس سے، گلائے تنگی قبا کیجیے. زندگی کا جب معاملہ ہے، ایک لمحے میں فیصلہ کیجیے. مجھ کو عادت ہے روٹھ جانے کی، مجھ کو عادت ہے روٹھ جانے کی، آپ مجھ کو منا لیا کیجیے. کس سے اظہار مدعا کیجیے، آپ سنتے نہیں ہیں کیا کیجیے. مجھ کو عادت ہے روٹھ جانے کی، آپ مجھ کو منا لیا کیجیے. ملتے رہیے اسی تپاک کے ساتھ، ملتے رہیے اسی تپاک کے ساتھ، بے وفائی کی انتہا کیجیے. ملتے رہیے اسی تپاک کے ساتھ، بے وفائی کی انتہا کیجیے. کا کو ہے شاید خودکشی خواہش، شاہ بانو سے التجا کیجیے. مجھ سے کہتی تھی وہ شراب آنکھیں، مجھ سے کہتی تھی وہ شراب آنکھیں، آپ وہ زہر مت پیا کیجیے. رنگ ہر رنگ مہداد طلب، خون تھونکو تو واہ واہ کیجیے. خون تھونکوں تو واہ واہ کیجیے. تو کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، تو اس بستی میں رہی ہو پر نہ رہی ہو. کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، کسی سے کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، تو اس بستی میں رہی ہو پر نہ رہی ہو. کسی سے عہد و پیما کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، تو اس بستی میں رہی ہو پر نہ رہی ہو. سفر کرنا ہے آخر دو پلک بیچ، سفر کرنا ہے آخر دو پلک بیچ، سفر لمبا ہے بسے بستر نہ رہی ہو، کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، تو اس بستی میں رہی ہو پر نہ رہی ہو، سفر کرنا ہے آخر دو پلک بیچ، سفر لمبا ہے بسے بستر نہ رہی ہو، ہر ایک حالت کے بیری ہیں یہ لمحے، ہر ایک حالت کے بیری ہے یہ لمحے، کسی غم کے بھروسے پر نہ رہی ہو، سہولت سے گزر جاؤ میری جان، سہولت سے گزر جاؤ میری جان، کہیں جینے کی خاطر مر نہ رہی ہو، ہمارا عمر بھر کا ساتھ ٹھہرا، ہمارا ہمارا عمر بھر کا ساتھ ٹھہرا، ہمارا عمر بھر کا ساتھ ٹھہرا، سو میرے ساتھ تو دن بھر نہ رہی ہو، بہت دشوار ہو جائے گا جینا، بہت دشوار ہو جائے گا جینا، یہاں تو ذات کے اندر نہ رہی ہو، سویرے ہی سے گھر آ جائی ہو آج، سہولت سے گزر جاؤ میری جان، سہولت سے گزر جاؤ میری جان، کہیں جینے کی خاطر مر نہ رہی ہو، ہمارا عمر بھر کا ساتھ ٹھہرا، سو میرے ساتھ تو دن بھر نہ رہی ہو، بہت دشوار ہو جائے گا جینا، یہاں تو ذات کے اندر نہ رہی ہو، سویرے ہی سے اگر آ جائی ہو آج، ہے روز واقعہ باہر نہ رہی ہو، کہیں چھپ جاؤ نہ خانوں میں جا کر، کہیں چھپ جاؤ نہ خانوں میں جا کر، شب فتنہ ہے اپنے گھر نہ رہی ہو، نظر پر بار ہو جاتے ہیں منظر، نظر پر بار ہو جاتے ہیں منظر، جہاں رہی ہو وہاں اکثر نہ رہی ہو، کسی سے عہد و پیما کر نہ رہی ہو، تو اس بستی میں رہی ہو پر نہ رہی ہو۔ فرماتے ہیں کہ تھوڑا میں انہیں کے پڑھوں گا، پھر اس کے بعد ہم اینڈ کریں گے۔ یہ سنیے گا کہ یہ میں نے کبھی پڑھی نہیں یہاں پہ، تو سنیے گا مدثر بھائی کہ شوق کا بار اتار آیا ہوں، شوق کا بار اتار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں، شوق کا بار اتار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں، اف میرا آج میں کدا آنا، اف میرا آج میں کدا آنا، یوں تو میں کتنی باہر آیا ہوں، شوق کا بار اتار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں، اف میرا آج میں کدے آنا، یوں تو میں کتنی باہر آیا ہوں، دوستو دوست کو سنبھالو، دوست تو دوست کو سنبھالا دو، دور سے پافگار آیا ہوں، صفے آخر سے لڑ رہا تھا میں، صفے آخر سے لڑ رہا تھا میں، اور یہاں میں لاشوار آیا ہوں، وہی دشتے عذاب مایوسی، وہی دشتے عذاب مایوسی، وہیں انجام کہر آیا ہوں، شوق کا بھار اتار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں، آج میں اس کو ہار آیا ہوں۔ تو اس طرح فرماتے ہیں کہ کچھ میں ایسا پڑھنے جا رہا ہوں جو میں نے کبھی یہاں پہ پڑھا نہیں۔ کیا ہو گیا ہے، کیا ہو گیا ہے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، آزاد کر رہے ہیں گرفتار کو تیرے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، آزاد کر رہے ہیں گرفتار کو تیرے، اب تو ہے مدتوں سے شب و روز روبرو، اب تو ہے مدتوں سے شب و روز روبرو، کتنے ہی دن گزر گئے دیدار کو تیرے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، آزاد کر رہے ہیں گرفتار کو تیرے، کر رات چوبدار سمیت آ کے لے گیا، کر رات چوبدار سمیت آ کے لے گیا، ایک گول طرح دارے سرے دار کو تیرے، اب اتنی خود ہو گئی دار ہے یقین تیری، اب روکتا نہیں ہے کوئی وار کو تیرے، اب رشتہ مریض و مسیحا ہوا ہے خوار، سب پیشوار سمجھتے ہیں بیمار کو تیرے، سب پیشوار سمجھتے ہیں بیمار کو تیرے، کیا ہو گیا ہے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، آزاد کر رہے ہیں گرفتار کو تیرے، اے رنگ اس میں سود ہے تیرا زیاں نہیں، اے رنگ اس میں سود ہے تیرا زیاں نہیں، خوشبو اڑا کے لے گئی زنگار کو تیرے، کیا ہو گیا ہے گیسوئے خامدار کو تیرے، آزاد کر رہے ہیں گرفتار کو تیرے۔ اس طرح فرماتے ہیں کہ اور ایک غزل نظر میں ہے کہ یہ تھوڑا میرے لیے ڈیفیکلٹ ہے پڑھنا، بٹ ٹرائی کروں گا۔ نہ ہوا نصیب قرار جاں، ہوس قرار بھی اب نہیں، نہ ہوا نصیب قرار جاں، ہوس قرار بھی اب نہیں، تیرا انتظار بہت کیا، تیرا انتظار بھی اب نہیں، نہ ہوا نصیب قرار جاں، ہوس قرار بھی اب نہیں، تیرا انتظار بہت کیا، تیرا انتظار بھی اب نہیں، تجھے کیا خبر محسال نے ہمیں کیسے زخم دیے یہاں، تجھے کیا خبر محسال نے ہمیں کیسے زخم دیے یہاں، تیری یادگار تھی ایک خلش، تیری یادگار بھی اب نہیں، نہ گلے رہے نہ گما رہے، نہ گزارشیں ہیں نہ گفتگو، نہ گلے رہے نہ گما رہے، نہ گزارشیں ہیں نہ گفتگو، وہ نشاط وعدہ وصل کیا، ہمیں اعتبار بھی اب نہیں، رہے نام رشتہ رفتگاں، نہ شکایتیں ہیں نہ شوخیاں، کوئی عذر خواہ تو اب کہاں، کوئی عذر دار بھی اب نہیں، کسے نظر دیں دل و جاں بہم کی نہیں، وہ کوکلے خم بخم، کسے ہر نفس کا حساب دے کہ شمیم یار بھی اب نہیں، وہ ہجوم دل زدہ گاں کی تھا، تجھے مزدہا ہو کے بکھر گیا، تیرے آستانے کی خیر ہو، سرے راہ غبار بھی اب نہیں، نہ ہوا نصیب قرار جاں، ہوس قرار بھی اب نہیں، تیرا انتظار بہت کیا، تیرا انتظار بھی اب نہیں، تجھے کیا خبر محسال نے ہمیں کیسے کیسے زخم دیے یہاں، تیری یادگار تھی ایک خلش، تیری یادگار بھی اب نہیں۔ فرماتے ہیں کہ فرماتے ہیں کہ ہو کا عالم ہے یہاں نالہ گروں کے ہوتے، ہو کا عالم ہے یہاں نالہ گروں کے ہوتے، شہر خاموش ہے شوریدہ سروں کے ہوتے، کیوں شکستہ ہے تیرا رنگ متائے ساد رنگ، اور پھر اپنے ہی خونوں نے جگروں کے ہوتے، کارے فریاد و فغاں کس لیے موقوف ہوا، تیرے کوچے میں تیرے با ہنروں کے ہوتے۔ اسی طرح فرماتے ہیں کہ ایک پسندیدہ غزل میری، فرماتے ہیں کہ شوق کا رنگ بجھ گیا یاد کے زخم بھر گئے، شوق کا رنگ بجھ گیا یاد کے زخم بھر گئے، کیا میری فصل ہو چکی کیا میرے دن گزر گئے، شوق کا رنگ بجھ گیا یاد کے زخم بھر گئے، کیا میری فصل ہو چکی کیا میرے دن گزر گئے، راہ گزرے خیال میں دوش بدوش تھے جو لوگ، راہ گزرے خیال میں دوش بدوش تھے جو لوگ، وقت کی گردباد میں جانے کہاں بکھر گئے، شام ہے کتنی بے تپاک شہر ہے کتنا سہمناک، شام ہے کتنی بے تپاک شہر ہے کتنا سہمناک، ہم نفس ہو کہاں ہو تم، جانے یہ سب کدھر گئے؟ پاس حیات کا خیال ہم کو بہت برا لگا، پاس حیات کا خیال ہم کو بہت برا لگا، پس بہجوم مار کا جان کے بے سپر گئے۔ میں تو صفوں کے درمیاں کب سے پڑا ہوں نیم جاں، میں تو صفوں کے درمیاں کب سے پڑا ہوں نیم جاں، میرے تمام جانثار میرے لیے تو مر گئے۔ میں تو صفوں کے درمیاں کب سے پڑا ہوں نیم جاں، میرے تمام جانثار میرے لیے تو مر گئے۔ خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، یاد آئے گی اب تیری کب تک، خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، یاد آئے گی اب تیری کب تک، جانے والوں سے پوچھنا یہ صبا، جانے والوں سے پوچھنا یہ صبا، رہے آباد دل گلی کب تک، خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، یاد آئے گی اب تیری کب تک، جانے والوں سے یہ صبا پوچھنا، رہے آباد دل گلی کب تک، ہو کبھی تو شراب وصل نصیب، ہو کبھی تو شراب وصل نصیب، پیے جان میں خون ہی کب تک، خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، یاد آئے گی اب تیری کب تک، جانے والوں سے پوچھنا یہ صبا، رہے آباد دل گلی کب تک، ہو کبھی تو شراب وصل نصیب، پیے جان میں خون ہی کب تک، دل نے جو عمر بھر کمائی ہے، دل نے جو عمر بھر کمائی ہے، وہ دخاں دل سے جائے گی کب تک، دل نے جو عمر بھر کمائی ہے، وہ دخاں دل سے جائے گی کب تک، جس میں تھا سوز آرزو اس کا، جس میں تھا سوز آرزو اس کا، شب غم وہ ہوا چلی کب تک، بنی آدم کی زندگی ہے عذاب، بنی آدم کی زندگی ہے عذاب، یہ خدا کو رلائے گی کب تک، حادثہ زندگی ہے آدم کی، حادثہ زندگی ہے آدم کی، ساتھ دے گی بلا خوشی کب تک، حادثہ زندگی ہے آدم کی، ساتھ دے گی بلا خوشی کب تک، ہے جہنم، ہے جہنم جو یاد اب اس کی، ہے بہشت وجود تھی کب تک، وہ صبا، وہ صبا اس کے بن جو آئی تھی، وہ صبا اس کے بن جو آئی تھی، وہ اسے پوچھتی رہی کب تک، میر جانی، میر جانی ذرا بتائیے تو، میر جانی ذرا بتائیے تو، خود میں ٹھہریں گے آپ ہی کب تک، میر جانی ذرا بتائیے تو، خود میں ٹھہریں گے آپ ہی کب تک، حال صحن وجود ٹھہرے گا، حال صحن وجود ٹھہرے گا، تیرا ہنگامہ رخصتی کب تک، خون تھوکے گی زندگی کب تک، یاد آئے گی اب تیری کب تک۔ فرماتے ہیں کہ اسی طرح اسی ڈفرینٹ طرز میں فرماتے ہیں کہ ایک سایہ میرا مسیحا تھا، کون جانے وہ کون تھا کیا تھا، وہ فقط صحن تک ہی آتی تھی، میں بھی حجرے سے کم نکلتا تھا، تجھ کو بھولا نہیں وہ شخص کہ جو تیری باہوں میں بھی اکیلا تھا، جان لیوا تھی خواہش ورنہ وصل سے انتظار اچھا تھا، بات تو دل شکن ہے پر یارو، بات تو دل شکن ہے پر یارو، عقل سچی تھی عشق جھوٹا تھا، اپنے معیار تک نہ پہنچا میں، مجھ کو خود پر بڑا بھروسہ تھا، ایک سایہ میرا مسیحا تھا، کون جانے وہ کون تھا کیا تھا۔ فرماتے ہیں کہ یہ بہت میرے بہت قریب ہے یہ کہ ہے بکھرنے کو یہ محفل رنگ و بو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے ہم کہاں جائیں گے، ہے بکھرنے کو یہ محفل رنگ و بو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے ہم کہاں جائیں گے، ہر طرف ہو رہی ہے یہی گفتگو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ ہر متاع نفس نظر آہنگ کی ہم کو یاراں ہوس تھی بہت رنگ کی، گلزمی سے ابلنے کو ہے اب لہو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ اول شب مہتاب بھی جا چکا صحنے میں خانے سے، اب افق میں کہیں آخر شب ہے، خالی ہے جام و صبح، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ کوئی حاصل نہ تھا آرزو کا مگر سانحہ یہ ہے اب آرزو بھی نہیں، کوئی حاصل نہ تھا آرزو کا مگر سانحہ یہ ہے اب آرزو بھی نہیں۔ وقت کی اس مسافات میں بے آرزو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ کس قدر دور سے لوٹ کر آئے ہیں، کس قدر دور سے لوٹ کر آئے ہیں، یوں کہو عمر برباد کر آئے ہیں۔ تھا سراب اپنا سرمایہ جستجو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ ایک جنوں تھا کہ آباد ہو شہر جاں، ایک جنوں تھا کہ آباد ہو شہر جاں، اور آباد جب شہر جاں ہو گیا ہے یہ سرگوشیاں در بدر کو بکو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ دشت میں رقص شوق بہار اب کہاں، دشت میں رقص شوق بہار اب کہاں، باد پیمائی دیوانہ وار اب کہاں، بس گزرنے کو ہے موسم ہاؤ ہو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ ہم ہے رسوا کن دلی و لکھنؤ، اپنی کیا زندگی اپنی کیا آبرو، میر دلی سے نکلے گئے لکھنؤ، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ ہے بکھرنے کو یہ محفل رنگ بو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ ہر طرف ہو رہی ہے یہی گفتگو، تم کہاں جاؤ گے، ہم کہاں جائیں گے۔ فرماتے ہیں کہ آخری غزل، لمحے لمحے کی نارسائی ہے، لمحے لمحے کی نارسائی ہے، زندگی حالت جدائی ہے۔ مرد میدان ہوں اپنی ذات کا میں، مرد میدان ہوں اپنی ذات کا میں نے سب سے شکست کھائی ہے۔ ایک عجب حال ہے کہ اب اس کو، ایک عجب حال ہے کہ اب اس کو یاد کرنا بھی بے وفائی ہے۔ لمحے لمحے کی نارسائی ہے، زندگی حالت جدائی ہے۔ مرد میدان ہوں اپنی ذات کا میں نے سب سے شکست کھائی ہے۔ ایک عجب حال ہے کہ اب اس کو یاد کرنا بھی بے وفائی ہے۔ آپ اردو ادب اٹھا کے پڑھ لیجئے، آپ کو جان جیسا شاعر نہیں ملے گا۔ ایک عجب حال ہے کہ اب اس کو یاد کرنا بھی بے وفائی ہے۔ اب یہ صورت ہے جانے جاں کہ تجھے، اب یہ صورت ہے جانے جاں کہ تجھے بھولنے میں میری بھلائی ہے۔ خود کو بھولا ہوں اس کو بھولا ہوں، خود کو بھولا ہوں اس کو بھولا ہوں، عمر بھر کی یہی کمائی ہے۔ میں ہنرمندان رنگ ہوں میں ہنرمندان رنگ ہوں میں نے خون تھوکا ہے دھات پائی، خون تھوکا ہے دھات پائی ہے۔ جانے یہ تیرے وصل کے ہنگام، تیری فرقت کہاں سے آئی ہے۔ With that, ٹاٹا بائی بائی۔ کل ہم انشاءاللہ الکیمسٹ کو ختم کرنے جا رہے ہیں، 25% اب رہ گیا ہے۔ سو ٹمورو وی ول فنش دا بک اٹ سیلف، ٹیک کیئر۔ آئی ووڈ ہیو فنشڈ اٹ ٹوڈے، مگر میں نے سوچا کہ میں بھی تھک گیا پڑھتے پڑھتے، آپ بھی اسٹوری میں بالکل گھل مل گئے ہوں گے، وہ تصورات آئے ہوں گے آپ کو سب، ہاک کے، ڈیزرٹ کے، فیلکن کے، الکیمسٹ کے۔ فرمائش، چلو میں آ رہا ہوں یکتا، آئی ایم کمنگ، ہاں کوئی نہیں، میں یہ پڑھوں گا، آپ کہیں میں پڑھوں گا۔ چلو بعد، ٹھیک ہے میں پڑھ رہا ہوں۔ چلو بادیں بہار ہی جا رہی ہیں، چلو بادیں بہار ہی جا رہی ہیں، پیا جی کی سواری جا رہی ہے، چلو بادیں بہار ہی جا رہی ہیں، پیا جی کی سواری جا رہی ہے۔ شمال جاویداں سبز جاں سے، شمال جاویداں سبز جاں سے، تمنا کی اماری جا رہی ہے۔ فگائیں دشمنے دارے دل و جاں، میری حالت سدھاری جا رہی ہے پہلو میں ٹکے کی ایک حسینہ، ہے پہلو میں टके की एक हसीना तेरी फुरकत गुजारी जा रही है पहलू में टके की एक हसीना तेरी फुरकत गुजारी जा रही है। जो इन रोज़ों मेरा गम है वो ये है कि गम से बुर्द जा रही है सीने में अजब एक हश्र बरपा है सीने में अजब एक हश्र बरपा कि दिल से बेकरारी जा रही है सीने में अजब एक हश्र बरपा कि दिल से बेकरारी जा रही है। मैं पैहम हार कर ये सोचता हूँ मैं पैहम हार कर ये सोचता हूँ वो क्या शय है जो हारी जा रही है। दिल उसके रूबरू है और गुमसुम वो सैयद बच्चा हो और शेख के साथ वो सैयद बच्चा हो और शेख के साथ मियाँ इज्जत हमारी है पर है बरपा हर गली में शोर नगमा है बरपा हर गली में शोर नगमा मेरी फरियाद मारी जा रही है। वो याद अब हो रही है दिल से रुखसत वो याद अब हो रही है दिल से रुखसत मियाँ प्यारों की प्यारी जा रही है। दरेगा तेरी नजदीकी मियाँ जा तेरी दूरी पे वारी जा रही है। बहुत बदहाल है बस्ती तेरे लोग बहुत बदहाल है बस्ती तेरे लोग तो फिर तू क्यों सवारी जा रही है। क्या खूबसूरत सोशोलॉजिकल कॉन्सेप्ट जॉन ने इस मिसरे में डाला है। बहुत बदहाल है बस्ती तेरे लोग बहुत बदहाल है बस्ती तेरे लोग तो फिर तू क्यों सवारी जा रही है। तेरी मरहम गरी ए मसीहा तेरी मरहम गरी ए मसीहा खराश दिल पे वारी जा रही है। तेरी मरहम गर तेरी मरहम निगाही ए मसीहा तेरी मरहम निगाही ए मसीहा खराश दिल पे वारी जा रही है। खराबे में अजब था शौर बर्पा दिलों से इंतजारी जा रही है। चलो बातें बहारी जा रही है पिया जी की सवारी जा रही। टेक केयर एवरीवन।